destination people always seem to find the magic and the mystery in this beautiful world. Don't get left behind.
Hi, I'm Tom Anderson, and this is Webinar on Wednesday with Destinations Together. As always, a warm welcome to our Zoom listeners and cruise line executives that are tuning in. The positive cruise industry news continues as more cruise ships are sailing from the United States, as well as other home ports around the globe. Delta variant aside, this bodes well for the sustainability of cruise lines as they begin carrying passengers and finally making some money in this post-pandemic environment. As the number of operating ships increases, the number of ports visited will also increase over time. So, as tour operators and attraction owners, you must ensure that you have the proper insurance in place to safeguard your business to meet the cruise line's minimal insurance requirements. In those post-pandemic environment, obtaining insurance quotes and ultimately selecting an insurance provider is more challenging than ever. This is why Larry and I wanted to offer this comprehensive webinar focused on the insurance to help ensure that you not only meet the insurance needs of the cruise industry, but also that you are sufficiently insured to adequately safeguard your business. Today's webinar is co-created with MHG Insurance to provide you the most up-to-date insurance information, answer your immediate questions, and offer you alternative and transparent policy options. The insurance experts on this webinar will provide a brief insurance overview and walk us through the application process so you can ultimately compare your policy options. Please post your questions on the Q&A tab during the session. And remember, as a tour operator, you simply cannot operate tours for cruise lines without proper insurance. Today's presentation is hosted by Destinations Together, which is an open platform of relevant information and collaboration to support the tourism industry. As a reminder, both Larry and I have a wealth of experience in the cruise industry, especially as it relates to destinations and shore cruises. Please contact Larry or me directly to discuss the specifics of your business so we can assist you in the best way possible. I'll turn this over to Larry to share some important information and then introduce our speakers for today's Destinations Together webinar on Wednesday. Larry?
Hey, thanks, Tom. I want to thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate your support. We do want to thank Beth Hatt and Melanie Kupitz from Aquila Center for Cruise Excellence, who were our guest presenters for our webinar on July 7th, featuring preparing your teams for the return of travel and cruise tourism. We hope you all have taken the opportunity to reach out to them for further information. The presentation presented their newly developed training modules, each carefully developed and crafted to help ensure you and your teams are ready for the arrival of guests to your destination. If you missed it, check it out on our website and/or reach out to Tom or I, and we will be happy to get you in touch with Beth and Melanie. Before I introduce our guest presenters for today's webinar, let me remind you of a few important housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar and we'll upload it to the website in the next few days. There is a Q&A tab, as Tom mentioned, below on your screen. We encourage you all to vote on the questions listed in the Q&A and to help ensure we include the most important ones. Please remember, we and our guests are only providing our opinions and possible sources for further information. Connor and Mark, please join me as I provide a quick introduction. Today's webinar titled Urgent Tour Operator Insurance, presented by MHG Insurance. No doubt you are training your teams to greet and entertain cruise guests while making sure you have proper insurance in place to conduct business safely. Due to the pandemic, applying for and obtaining liability insurance is more challenging than it was in the past. This webinar is co-created with MHG Insurance to provide you the most updated insurance information, answer your immediate questions, offer you an alternative policy option, and provide you with the support to efficiently complete your application and methodically compare your policy options. Please welcome Connor Hayes, Manager of Business Development at company's headquarters in Fort Lauderdale, and Mark Barton, Manager of Business Development at the Isles of Man office in MHG Insurance. Thank you both for being here today, and we look forward to your presentation and also providing answers to so many questions we have already gotten from registered guests and those that we will get during this session. I'm going to go ahead and open up the PowerPoint presentation and then let
Yep,
you guys.
I think that'll be a good move.
yourselves.
I'll give you a shout when we need that first slide up, which is, I guess, now actually. Okay, so as I said, welcome to our webinar on tour operator insurance. My name's Mark Barton and I'm joined by my colleague Connor Hayes. We at MHG have been working with the cruise industry for 30 plus years, and we wanted to share some points and advice with you. So let's move on to slide 2, if we may. Okay, so as cruise operations begin restarting, many shore excursion operators are going to be facing several new operating procedures in this post-pandemic world, one of which is going to be providing an insurance that meets the minimum insurance requirements of the cruise lines. And unfortunately, these insurances are seldom met by any local policies that you may be buying. Few cruise lines now allow passengers to arrange their own excursions, so the vast majority of shore excursions are now being arranged and purchased by the cruise lines. So this is making the insurance mandatory for many of the shore excursion operators, many people in the industry. So what does the program cover? Well, we're really looking here, as I said, at a jump between whatever cover you buy locally and the minimum requirements of the cruise lines. What are the key features, the application form, and who we are. So we're going to try and provide you some information on this as we go through the presentation. So if we can go to slide 3, please. So as I said, the package that we're offering here is a contingent liability program, and it's there to provide a jump between the insurance programs that you buy from your local market and the insurances that the cruise lines themselves require. It covers both your property and casualty and ocean marine risks, so it's not just a marine policy, and it satisfies all the requirements of the cruise industry, and we'll go on to that on the next slide. And it is important to note that we are looking here at the non-US tour and excursion operators. Most of the US based guys, they've got an insurance program that covers everything in the US anyway. But yes, if we can go to the next slide, we've actually got here several examples of the minimum insurance requirements laid down by the cruise lines, and we're quite happy to provide you with full copies of those if you contact us, and we'll happily email those out to you. So in part 1, yeah, the cover's got to include the cruise line and all their associates and their subsidiaries. Point 2, it's a contingent cover, so it's got to cover not just the general liability, but auto, and it's got to cover the waterborne. Point 3, that carrier has got to be A-rated, and our program's placed in Lloyd's of London, so we're definitely A-rated there. And point 4 is it's got to be a primary insurance, not a excess coverage. So it has to be primary for the US claims. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so it's got to cover with a 30-day notice in there, which means that, yeah, if there's for any reason the insurance is cancelled, we have to give 30 days notice to the cruise line of the tour operator's request to cancel that policy. Point 6 is the jurisdiction's got to be everywhere in the world, which of course includes the United States and Canada, which is, so that's the big problem you have with your local insurers. They often don't do that. Point 7 is the minimum levels of cover. This, generally speaking, is $2 million, except for anything to do with auto buses, where the requirements are often $5 million. And point 8 is if there is a local policy that requires a higher limit, then that local policy still has to be maintained. For example, being Europe, where auto policies are €6 million limit. Okay, let's go on to the next slide if we can. Thank you. So as I said before, the coverage is in 3 parts. There's a commercial general liability section, which is covering from the ground up. Then there's contingent auto. This is minimum local requirements for US claims, is that you've got to have a minimum $300,000 limit on your local auto liability, and then this policy will pick up in excess of that. Again, the same with contingent watercraft, where you've got to cover the excess above and beyond whatever the local policy has, and that local policy again has to have a minimum limit of $500,000. And can we go to the next slide, please? And as I mentioned before, this is the major difference you'll have between your local policies and the policies the cruise lines require you to see, which is our policies got to show worldwide jurisdiction, worldwide territory. So that's pretty much where we are. Now, the hard part on all this is then applying for that cover. And this is where I'm going to pass over to Connor and let you talk about how we deal with those applications to get those quotes.
Thank you very much, Mark. I really appreciate it. We thought by the way, my name is Connor Hayes and I'm the manager of business development at MHG here in our Fort Lauderdale office in South Florida. When it comes to applying for insurance, information is king. Information is king. It's as simple as that. The more information you can provide to the underwriter, the more comfortable the underwriter will become with the risk, and therefore the more flexibility you'll have at the negotiation table. Believe it or not, it's the application process or the completion of the application form, which is the biggest factor in delaying the process of obtaining a quote for tour and excursion operators liability, because insurers do request a lot of information on the application form and they do request a lot of supporting documentation. But once it's provided on the first year, you won't have to do so again going forward, or at least you won't have to provide the majority of the information again once the policy comes up for renewal. So the purpose of this section or this portion of the presentation is to provide some guidance regarding the application process and hopefully simplify it for you going forward. So we have here the first page. It's pretty self-explanatory. We don't need to go into too much detail here. Just please make sure that under the general application information section that you're putting in your current contact information, particularly your email address and cell phone number. The reason being is that should there ever be a claim, touch wood, should there ever be a claim that and insurers appoint a loss adjuster, it's the loss adjuster will be referring to this application form for the contact information to reach out to you. Moving on to section B, which is the operation information. Again, now here's where insurers get a little bit more specific. They're going to need a split of the percentage of your business by hotels and cruise lines, which is again, and again, it doesn't have to be an exact split. A reasonably accurate percentage split will suffice. And what percentage of guests do they come from US, European, or others? The reason why they ask for this split is because the more, or should I say, the less guests that you have from the US, the more you might be entitled to a premium discount under the policy. Now, that's not to say you're going to be penalized for having a majority of US nationals. That's not the case at all. But there are discounts available under the policy if, let's say, your percentage of guests fall under a certain threshold. And also be sure to input the average ticket price of your tour as well. And we will actually revisit the necessity of this later on, or the importance of inputting this information later on in the application process. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, section C, current excursion tour information. Right. This is a section in the application form that many applicants tend to get confused in. What insurers are asking for you here are your current, do you carry a current tour operators policy? Many applicants tend to input their local policy information into this section. That's not the case at all, because again, there's a separate section for that. So here on C, they're actually asking you to input your current tour operator. So if you're with MHG, you were to input the information for the MHG policy. If you're with someone else, you would input the information there. Okay, and claims history. If you've had no claims, perfect. Just check the box there. We're good to go. Now, if let's say you had a claim in the past, if it's a relatively minor one, when I say minor, I would say, you know, usually the rule of thumb is anything below $5,000. All you really need to do is just input the date, a brief description of the last, let's say, slip and trip, sprained ankle, and then the amount paid out by insurers. Now, if it's a significant claim, insurers are going to require additional information from you. And it's not to penalize you, it's not to catch you out, it's just to better understand the circumstances surrounding the incident that happened. You have a lot of occasions where there may have been a significant claim, even a fatality, but it may have been for circumstances beyond your control. A common claim that we do see on shore excursion is usually when you have a person, a guest of advanced age, with a pre-existing medical condition, tends to overexert themselves in the water while snorkeling or so forth and sustains a heart attack or a stroke. You know, I mean, those are circumstances really beyond the tour operator's control. If you've done all of the checks and balances beforehand, if you made sure that, you know, he or she was a competent swimmer and so forth. So insurers are not trying to catch you out. They're just trying to better understand the risk and the circumstances surrounding the loss. So if you have had a significant claim, please be transparent with insurers, because they're not out to penalize you. Try to provide as much information as possible, and also regarding the circumstances that led to the incident, but also try to describe any remedial measures that you've since put in place to mitigate the possibility of such a loss happening again in the future. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Local policy information. This is what we discussed previously. This is where you put in your information regarding if you carry a local general liability policy, if you carry a local auto policy, or if you carry a local watercraft policy. This is where section E is where you input that information. And going on to F, if you have this information to hand, again, golden, information is king. Please send us copies of your waivers of liability. If you use subcontractors, please send us a copy of their policy. If you use a lot of subcontractors, could you please send us a schedule of the subcontractors outlining which particular tours that these particular subcontractors offer. If you have an operations manual to hand, excellent. And if you have any promotional brochure or literature, please forward that as well. Next slide, please. Employees, again, these are pretty self-explanatory questions. We don't need to go through them one by one. Just take the time to read through these briefly. And just again, it's simply yes or no answers here, but we don't need to delve into them one by one. Now, if you do have, if your employees are trained in CPR and first aid, please forward a copy of their certificates. Again, information is king. I know I sound like a broken record at this point, but I can't reiterate that point enough. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, food and liquor. Gentlemen and ladies, this is a very, very important section. The reason being is that our underwriters need to know whether we should add coverage in respect of host liquor liability. It is available under the policy, and it is a coverage that is requested and required by the vast majority of the cruise lines, and it is available, as I said, under our program, but we need to know whether it should be added or not. And how we determine that is the answers to the questions under this particular section. So please be sure to be as accurate as possible when answering the questions under this section. If you require host liquor liability, then please state, and please be detailed in with regards to the provision of alcohol that you do. May we move on to the next slide, please? Subcontractors. Again, when it comes to subcontractors, we're going to need a copy of their insurances. And we're going to need to know which subcontractors provide which tours. So if you have subcontractor A provides kayaking, perfect. Subcontractor B provides walking tours. Subcontractor C provides transportation and transfers by land. We need this information because our insurers need to know who exactly they are going to be covering, because your subcontractors are going to be covered under the policy as well. So our insurers need to know who exactly they are insuring. Move on to the next slide, please. All right, here we go. Arguably the most important section in the entire application form. These are the tours that are covered under our program. It's quite a comprehensive list. And there are a number of tours there that aren't listed that we could consider. Parasailing would be one, scuba diving would be one, as well that we can consider. Deductors, amphibious deductors would be one as well that we can potentially cover under the program. Now, I know this might sound elementary, but it's important that basically all of the percentages of revenues that you allocate to each particular tour or excursion must add up to 100%. Again, I know that sounds elementary, but you'll be surprised how many applications we've seen where it does not add up to 100%. So if 10% of your revenues is derived from ATV tours, well then allocate 10%. If 5% is derived from train tours, then by all means, add the 5% there, but it must add up to 100%. And here at the bottom section, here is where you have the opportunity to list the subcontractors that you currently use and the percentage of the tour that you subcontract to them. May we move on to the next slide? All right, now we're getting into the coverage sections here. So here's your contingent general liability. Here is where you check your desired limit of insurance. Now, at the moment, we can offer a maximum of 3 million under our program. We are working on obtaining excess capacity to increase that to 5 million, because a lot of the cruise lines do require 5 million of coverage with regards to auto liability. But we are, right now, we're unable to offer that, but we are working on it, and we expect to have an update on that in the coming months, if not weeks. So right now, we can offer a maximum of 3 million under the program. Now, under this, the next section here is very, very important. We need to know your estimated gross sales for the next 12 months and your estimated number of guests for the next 12 months. Now, I know given the current uncertainty that we're all presently dealing with in the current environment, I know that it might be hard for people to guess exactly, I mean, like, where do you get that figure from, given the fact that things have been dormant for the last while? However, if you can just be as reasonably accurate as you possibly can, insurers will take that into account. So just give us as reasonably as accurate an estimation as you possibly can in terms of your estimated passenger numbers or guest numbers, and we'll work with that going forward. Again, we're going to need your estimated gross receipts as well. Again, as reasonably accurate as you can do going forward. Scrolling down, contingent auto, please be sure to send us, provide us with a schedule of vehicles that you use, because we need to determine whether they're private passenger vehicles, whether mini buses, whether they're coaches. This is information that our insurers are going to need. Now, if it's quite an extensive schedule, you can just provide it on a separate Excel spreadsheet or a Word document, if that's the case. Could we move on to the next slide, please? Again, contingent watercraft, exact same thing applies here. Exact same thing applies here as did with the auto section. We need you to provide a schedule of vehicles and a schedule of autos, a schedule of watercraft as well. We're also going to need copies of the local policies that you carry for your watercraft and for your autos. Now, as my colleague Mark may have mentioned, the minimum limit that needs to be carried under the primary or local auto policy is 300,000 for private passenger vehicles. It's 500,000 for minibuses and coaches. And moving on to the watercraft side, the minimum limit of insurance that must be carried under the local primary policy is watercraft liability. Is 500,000. And also it must cover over the side or in water passenger activity as well, such as swimming, snorkeling, and so forth. So that's basically the crux of the application process. I hope I simplified it for you. Again, I mean, an incomplete application form is really the biggest barrier to getting a quote as quickly as possible, because once we've received all of the information, we can turn around a quote between 3 to 5 business days. It's usually closer to the 3-day mark. So if we can get all the information, if we can collate everything we need, the application process or the quotation process is pretty straightforward. So that's basically it. And I'm open to any questions. Oh, sorry, excuse me. The next steps, sorry. The next steps, submit a fully completed application form. Ensure that all supporting documentation are included. So as I said, the application form, it should be supported by the local policies, by the waiver of liability, by the operations manual, and by any schedules of vehicles that you may have. So if you could just submit that to, if it's a US or Caribbean or Latin American tour operator, that goes to me in the Isle of Man office, in the Fort Lauderdale office. And if it's any inquiries for Europe, Asia, or the rest of the world, she'll be submitted to my colleague Mark Barton in our Isle of Man office. And please allow 3 to 5 days for a quote to be received. The MHG difference is that, as my colleague Mark Barton may have referenced, we've been a trusted partner of the cruise lines for 30 years. We can count some of the major brands in the world as clients or former clients. We have in-house expertise in tour and excursion operators liability. Me personally, I've been underwriting shore excursion insurance for over 10 years. Brand strength, we're a recognized brand, not just in the Caribbean, but in Europe as well. We have offices on the doorstep of the 2 biggest cruise industries in the world, which is the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. So we are ideally positioned and ideally equipped to write and to service tour operators in insurance. And we very much hope that you'll consider us going forward. And again, here's the contact information there for myself and Mark. Again, any European ones go over to my colleague. Any European, African, or Asian go to Mark Barton. But for any inquiries originating from the Caribbean or from Latin America would go to me in the Fort Lauderdale office, and we'll be happy to service you.
Fantastic. Great job, guys. Really, truly appreciate it. Listen, before I turn it over to Tom for the Q&As, I do want to do a poll out there. We do want to ask the participants out there in reference to, do you want to be contacted directly by Connor or Mark? And then also, Connor and Mark have offered to do a workshop. So we're just asking people, if you're interested in a workshop, please, push the yes button during the poll so we can find out who's interested, and we'll go ahead and get that set up and notify you directly. So with that, Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Larry. And Connor and Mark, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it provided a great overview, a nice comprehensive review of the application. I thought what I would do is I would start with so there's a lot of Q&As that we received in advance. There are some in the Q&A section as well. We're going to make every effort to get to the questions. We do have probably a good 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A, so that's excellent. But just to start where we ended the presentation with the application, you had a really great list from aerial trams to zorbing and everything in between. So that it was really kind of fun to see that list of tours out there. And so my question is, we went through each section with you, Connor. Is there a particular section that sort of statistically, this is where someone filling out the application, if they're going to fall off the wagon, this is the section that is sort of under documented, or where it forces you as an MHG representative to go back to the tour operator and say, hey, I need more information on this. So which sections should the tour operators really kind of focus in on to make sure that they're complete and full?
That's a very good question. As I mentioned during the presentation, it's the back and forth with the client trying to collate the additional information that we need is what really delays the quote. We can turn around a quote pretty quickly once we have all of the information. But to answer your question, there's several, unfortunately, Tom. It's local policy information tends to be a stickler. We don't have, the insurer does not input or provide us with information that we need regarding the local policies, because our program is not meant to replace local coverage. It is a contingent or excess program that's supposed to bridge the gap between local insurance policies and the insurance requirements required by the cruise lines. So providing the local insurance policies is key. It's critical. It's absolutely critical. Another part of the application form that people tend to fall down on is estimated number of guests for the coming year. Again, sometimes they're provided, but the application specifically requests for a split of this number of guests per how many are transported by land and how many are transported over the water. And the application form actually requests this split, which again is very important too. Estimated gross receipts or gross sales is another piece of information that is key as well that we often don't get. Excuse me. Waivers of liability, again, we need a copy of them too. So yeah, there's several sections of the application form, but those ones that tend to be sticklers, but those would be the main ones.
Okay, thanks for the follow-up there. And in follow-up to one of the comments you mentioned is we have in the Q&A session, how do you accurately estimate the numbers of passengers you expect to have on tour in this sort of post-pandemic environment where cruise lines have logically changed the occupancy per voyage as they're trying to grow back the business in this post-pandemic environment?
You're just going to have to be as reasonably accurate as you possibly can. Insurers are not going to hold you to this. You know, they will give you some flexibility because the rate is going to be like one of the fundamental rating factors under the policy is estimated guest numbers or passenger numbers. But insurers are not going to hold you to this. They will give you some flexibility, you know, regarding your estimated passengers number. Mark, would that be fair enough to say? Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that's very true. Whilst we expect to see a reduction on the number of passengers per bus or per vessel because of requirements for keeping everyone separate, there is on the other side, we do expect to see the vast majority of shore excursions being sold on the cruise ship, as opposed to the pre-pandemic days when a lot of passengers would exit the ship and then find their own excursion when they got ashore. And that option at the moment is not open to them because the cruise lines are saying, well, if you leave our ship, you have to go on an organized excursion that's approved by the ship. Otherwise, we don't know where you've been. We don't know who you've been exposed to. We probably won't let you back on the ship afterwards. So there's a balance here where yes, certainly there'll be fewer passengers per bus, but there may be more buses for the passengers from the ship.
And I imagine that's also a moving target as well. And what is the norm at this moment in time with the variant D? Things might get a little bit more constricted. If that goes away, they might be more flexible and open. Here's another question. Go ahead, Mark. Sorry.
No, carry on, please. Carry on.
From Marcelino, in many cases, tour operators canceled their insurance a few months after the pandemic started. Most of the operators would not have a current insurance coverage. Is this a penalizing issue? Now, how do you manage to this?
No, not at all. Insurers are very, very aware that the vast majority of shore excursion policies were cancelled like as the pandemic began to unfold. I mean, you're not going to carry insurance if you're not doing any business. It's as simple as that. And we cancelled or were able to cancel virtually all of, or indeed all of our policies for our clients throughout the pandemic, and we managed to get them a prorated refund under each and every one as well. So that wouldn't be a penalizing factor going forward.
Okay, it sounds like it's just the pandemic has been a painful fact of life, and everyone's trying to reach across and lean into it a little bit. From Deborah Grant, would you offer coverage to groups like cooperatives that represent small tour operators or a group of smaller tour operators?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that question. We haven't come across that before, but it's something that we would be willing to bring to our underwriters and to have a discussion with. So I wish I had a comprehensive answer to that, but I don't. But it's something that we could certainly look into. Like, we would need to better understand this. I mean, what exactly is meant by this cooperative and who they represent and so forth. You know, what volume of business do they represent? But it's something that we could definitely take under consideration.
So then the takeaway I get from that is if you have some sort of question that isn't necessarily in the mainstream, no harm in contacting you guys and,
Exactly.
and putting the question out there and getting some feedback on it.
Exactly.
Here's an interesting question from Sammy. Why do we need insurance if our sub-suppliers have insurance?
Mark, you want to answer that one?
Okay. If you've signed a contract with a cruise line, and under that contract, you've given the cruise line certain assurances and agreements, and one of those agreements is that you're going to provide insurance, then you have to provide that insurance to the cruise line. When we ask you for details of who your subcontractors are and confirmation that those subcontractors have their own insurances, that is all taken into consideration when the premiums are charged. And for example, you might have somebody whose main business is a tour agency, where basically you don't own any of the buses, you don't own any of the watercraft, you merely use them and they are your subcontractors. This is going to change your risk totally, because in the event that there is an accident, the accident's probably likely to be falling towards one of those subcontractors rather than yourselves. But nevertheless, the cruise line hasn't got a contract with those subcontractors. The cruise line has a contract with you, and they're looking to you for your insurance. They don't want to police all the insurances you have with your subcontractors, so they're just going to hold you responsible. And that is what our insurances will protect you against. We would expect and hope to look towards those subcontractors for some sort of reimbursement at some stage, but ultimately the contract is signed by the shore excursion operating company with the cruise line. So that's where the buck stops.
Excellent question. And I think a very, very straightforward and clear answer. Thank you for that. Mark, just following on, when we're talking about contracts with cruise lines, oftentimes cruise lines place in different requirements on the tour operators that are just part of the contract. How does the tour operator make sure that they're sufficiently covered for some of these special contingencies and requirements placed on by the individual cruise lines that's folded into the contract with the tour operator?
We've got copies of most of the contracts that the cruise lines require, and they do follow a fairly standard pattern, which is mostly that in the event of a claim, we want to make sure that we have access to your insurers. We want to make sure that your insurers recognize that they're primary and that it's up to your insurers to go and seek reimbursement from some other reinsurer, subcontractors insurance, whatever. They want to make sure that the security of that company is sufficient, that they're comfortable with it, so A+. And they want to make sure that the jurisdiction means that in the event of a claim occurring and being brought in America, that our insurer is going to perform for that. Those are the real main concerns the insurers have. And sure, they have a schedule of different limits they may require for different locations, and a schedule of limits for depending on whether it's a waterborne activity or an automobile activity. But all of those programs, they follow a fairly set pattern. They're not always with the same amount. Some cruise lines will require higher limits, some lesser. So in each instance, we need to look, for example, some of the cruise lines that work mostly in European waters might have different requirements from those that are mostly working in Caribbean waters.
And I guess the other underlying comment I would make to all tour operators out there, please, 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 please read the contract. Make sure you know exactly what you're signing, because it's just important. You just need to safeguard and protect your own business. An interesting question from Marcelino. Local insurance for subcontractors, riverboats, for instance, a $500,000 liability insurance seems a bit high to carry for each company before insuring with MHG, for the local insurance. Any thoughts about that $500,000 limit on riverboats?
Yeah, I mentioned that on most waterborne policies, if you buy your waterborne policy from a local insurer, he would, generally speaking, even on the small yachts that we see being insured, they generally get a limit of $1 million. And I'd say that the vast majority of commercial rivercraft certainly working in Europe, be insured with a P&I club, where the limit will probably be $500 million. So actually for us, $500,000 seems to be pretty light.
Yeah.
I would think that any local insurer who's offering a limit of liability less than $1 million would ordinarily be able to offer that as an alternative. If not, I would question why. And if those local insurers can't offer sufficient liability insurance, there's plenty of people in the fixed cost and the P&I, fixed cost P&I and mutual P&I world who can write liabilities as a separate policy.
Okay, and that sort of, I think, bleeds into Yvonne's question. The local insurance in a Caribbean island needs to has what kind of limit? And she's asking if that's 500,000 like is asked for in the US, or is it different in the Caribbean islands?
It's $500,000 USD.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the local limit required. Now, we understand there are some territories out there, particularly Latin America, where those limits of liability are simply not available in the local market. We have come across that. For example, Honduras, the island of Roatan, that would be one where these limits of liability that are, or these local limits of liability that are required under our tour operators program are simply not available in some markets, in some jurisdictions. And we have on occasion obtained an exemption or flexibility from insurers on a case-by-case basis to lower the limits or the minimum limits required under our program. But their circumstances would have to be extenuating. For example, the limits that you're asking are simply not available in the local market, if that makes sense.
And then a comment and follow up from Marcelino. Some insurance companies require tour operators to have a local liability insurance in excess of 100,000, and then subcontractors are also required to have their own insurance. Is this too much insurance? And I don't know if you can ever have too much insurance, actually, but the question isn't this too much insurance, or maybe it's sort of reiterative insurance?
No, because the tour operator needs to carry their own policies. And the subcontractors need to carry their own policies, because remember, these are two separate entities here, so they need to carry their own local policies. But what the tour operator's policy does, it's an umbrella policy, which essentially will cover everybody. It will sit on top of the insurances of both the local tour operator and the subcontractors, and bridges the gap, as myself and Mark keep referencing. It bridges the gap between the local policies and what the cruise lines offer or request.
Okay. Rita asked the questions. We have the issue that the liability insurance is not available. I'm not exactly sure where Rita is from, but do you have any thoughts about that when the liability insurance is not available locally?
Mark?
Yeah,
this is in Guatemala.
Okay, well,
thank you, Rita.
Yeah, okay. I can't speak about Guatemala. I'd leave that to Connor. So Connor, do you want to take over from there?
Guatemala, well, I haven't come across a case yet where the liability insurance is simply, if that was the case for the liability, because we would need to know what type of, it is possible that our insurers may consider that, but we really need to know about the type of tours that are being offered by this local operator. If it was the more benign tours, let's say like colony tours or walking tours or museum tours, well, then it's possible that insurers may forego that requirement. But if we're talking about a local operator offering zip lining or zorbing or ATV tours, I don't think that would be a possibility under our program.
No. Okay. And it sounds like this would be also a case where maybe Rita could get a hold of you guys and kind of
absolutely
walk through the specific cases there that she's facing in Guatemala.
Absolutely.
This comes from an anonymous attendee. I think it's probably a question that might be on many listeners' list. For the Mexican Caribbean, would you offer a coverage in case of COVID? And how is COVID handled in insurance policies moving forward? And I'm sure this is a hot button issue.
Mark, you want to have a stab at that before I do?
The overriding situation we have in the Lloyd's of London market is that there's a market-wide COVID exclusion on all the maritime underwriters in Lloyd's, and that's mandated through their own committees and their own board of directors. And that filters down through on virtually every policy I handle. It doesn't affect the employee benefit programs we have, where we're covering medical expenses, where you truly could not live with a COVID exclusion. It would impact upon you. But on the marine liability market and the general liability market, we are living, I'm afraid, with a market-wide COVID exclusion, in much the same way that we had an exclusion for the millennium bug when that came up in the year 2000,
Right.
and other market exclusions as they come on. It's just, we have to live with that, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And that's what it is, industry-wide, correct?
It's
It doesn't matter where you go, that's going to be excluded.
Correct.
We received some questions in advance as part of the registration process. I wanted to take care of most of the live ones that came in while we were chatting here, but let me just jump over to some of the ones that were received through the registration process. From Gorbis Travel, why is it so difficult to get a proposal from insurance companies for the 5 million auto liability? And you did touch on this in your presentation, so trying to get a little bit more context around this. This is Gorbis Travel in Montenegro.
Mark, you want to answer that?
Yeah, we have had huge problems with, in particular, auto liability, where the claims pattern has skewed the overall experience for the underwriters in the shore excursion market. The number of the frequency of auto claims may not be that great, but the amount when they happen are stratospheric, and it's led to a lot of underwriters moving away from the shore excursion insurance market totally, and the few underwriters we have left are willing to write this class of business, but they are restricting their exposure to claims, and which is why at the moment the highest limit we can offer on anything is $3 million. And it has to be said that the fight to get that additional $2 million has not been easy. It's been very, very tough, because those underwriters are looking at a claims exposure that I'm afraid when it happens, it tends to blow straight through the policy. And you need an awful lot of auto policies premium to pay 2 or 3 claims that blow through your cover. So at the moment we are suffering because we just can't get the support from the underwriters to write that next tranche of liability.
And of course, his following question is, how do I get it in a destination that's not part of the EU?
You'll find that on the requirements from the cruise lines, they state they require $2 million limit for the policy. They want a $5 million limit for the auto buses, but we've had to explain to them that we can't do that at the moment. We can get 3 million, we can't get 5. We are trying to get 5. We recognize the contracts say you've got to have 5. But as far as I'm aware, I think the other insurers in the market have all been suffering the same problems that we've been having, which is that it's been difficult to get that extra $2 million.
Yeah. This is a related question. I'm going to rephrase it because the wording's a little bit interesting. This is coming out of the United States. I operate an excursion with 10 passenger vans. Do my insurance rate go up when something really bad happens to, I don't know, a flight seeing excursion or some other kind of excursion that is tragic? And does that impact all the rates of all the other insurance in the region?
I don't even know where to begin answering that. That's a very arbitrary, speculative, pointless kind.
So maybe, and Maybe I'll just have them to suggest that they circle back with you and kind of discuss
Yeah.
it through.
Yeah,
'Cause
I
it
would
does
like
seem,
to better understand the,
it seems sort of situational, the
Yeah.
question is, do you have insurance per call for the smaller out of the way destinations?
okay, no, we cannot offer a policy per call, but what we can offer is an annual policy that is based on the revenues or sales generated from one call. So even though, but also we need to highlight as well that the minimum premium under our program for a $1 million limit of liability is $10,000. So you need to be aware that and the minimum premium for a 2 million limited liability is 15,000 USD. So people need to be aware that before they go through the application process, because that might be a fit for them.
Okay. My question here, allotropical tours, also important to know if worldwide jurisdiction, if there's any restriction with any of the cruise lines, do all cruise lines accept this insurance? I think you were clear that they do, but just want to reiterate that MHG is approved by all cruise lines.
I can probably turn that around by saying that there have been instances where some of the cruise operators have been accepting non-US jurisdiction on the policies. You know, I've got examples of certain operators working in the EU where they have managed to persuade the cruise lines that they have EU-wide coverage and that they're working with an EU-based cruise line, so EU law should apply. That seems to be falling away because I'm afraid most of the cruise lines, even the EU-based cruise lines, either have connections with American ownership or American sales teams, and they have assets in America. And the concern is that if the claim occurs in Europe, it's not going to stop that claim from transporting itself across to the US. And so therefore, the number of occasions when a cruise line has been willing to accept jurisdiction other than worldwide has been reducing. And I expect that to fall away to pretty much zero fairly soon, where I think virtually all the cruise lines are going to say, we cannot accept a jurisdiction reduction. We have to have worldwide on that policy.
Right. One more came in from Marcelina. Can you have insurance only for cruise business? In the application, hotels are mentioned. Do they have to be included? As cruise business is seasonal for us, could we have an insurance only for the cruise season?
Yes, correct. Yes, you can. Yes, that is possible. Again, but the policy will still be 12 months in duration, but it'll be based on the figures that you use for cruise line guests only.
Okay. And then one quick little follow-up from Yvonne. She says our local minimum for autos is 50,000. So for us to reach 500,000 is a pretty steep challenge.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that. Now, as I said, there has been occasions in the past where we managed to negotiate that. We've managed to negotiate that down to 250,000 in the past, but it would be a tall order for us to convince our underwriters to go as low as 50,000.
Okay, and I think that Larry, I think that pretty much covers all the questions that I'm seeing in advance, etc. So,
All right.
That was a great
Fantastic.
session.
I do want to give a shout out to Charles that mentioned something in the Q&A for those that if you didn't read it, take a look. But I do want to mention that we did the poll questions, and there were quite a few that reached out or wanted to be reached out to, but also it was encouraging to see that there was, you know, a good 15 that were interested in doing a workshop. So we'll follow up with you as well as everybody else that we mail out information to see if people want to join a workshop. And if we need to, we'll do it at different time zones and also do multiple ones as well. So anyway, Mark and Connor, this was great. Thanks so much for providing all this information.
Thank you.
We truly appreciate it. And again, we will follow up with any unanswered comments that came through that you may want to, reach out individually to. So again, thanks so much. We truly, truly appreciate it. Tom and I want to thank everybody for attending today and watching our videos on webinars, on our website as well. Please, check it out for any past webinar recordings we did. Your continued support is appreciated, and we look forward to future webinars going forward. Please visit www.destinationstogether.com for all our past webinars, and don't hesitate, please, to share the website to others.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, again, I'd like to reiterate that. Thank you very much for the time, and thank you. Okay, goodbye, guys.
Thank you, Connor. Thank you, Mark. It was great.
Thanks, everybody.
Destination together, won't you set me free? I'll take a train, a plane, a big cruise ship. It doesn't really matter to me. Destination people always seem to find the magic and the mystery in this beautiful world. Don't get left behind.